Sometimes it isn't the toughest question in an interview that changes everything, it's the simplest one. In this debate, a former Trump advisor arrives ready to argue that free speech is under threat in Britain. But once she's asked to back that claim up with just one concrete example, the entire conversation takes an unexpected turn. Watch closely, because the moment that follows explains why this interview has sparked so much discussion.
It's funny that you think that he's taking a dig. Do you not think that when an 82-year-old man is arrested for posting something on Facebook, that is not a form of censorship?
Well, it depends what he posts, doesn't it? Depends if it's legal.
Well,
what did that 82-year-old man post?
Well, let's back up a minute here. If we are starting to scrutinize everything that someone says, if we're arresting them because it is hate speech.
What is you mentioned a specific case there. What is it this 82-year-old was arrested for?
Honestly, I can't remember, but what I do remember...
You're telling me that it's outrageous that an 82-year-old man was...
Back up a minute.
No, sorry, this is important because you just said this is an example of free speech under threat in the UK, but you can't tell me what he was arrested for.
I don't remember the
So why are you bringing it up then?
I brought it up as an example that if we are scrutinizing what an 82-year-old man posts on Facebook...
But you can't assess that without knowing what he said, can you?
Well, you know what? Let's just say I brought up a wrong example because I don't have the context
Could it possibly be because it's all a load of nonsense and free speech isn't under threat in the UK at all? Which I think you've just demonstrated respectfully.
You know what? I've been there I've lived in the UK for 24 years. And yes, I do believe that censorship, it started with political correctness.
Right.
And as political correctness moved from accusing people of microaggressions and then people getting triggered over what somebody said, it has been a form of putting a speech straitjacket on people.
So what can't you say in the UK right now without being arrested that you think people should have the right to say?
You know what? That's a very good question.
It is. Thank you.
It is. I can't answer that question, and I can't give you an example exactly. But see, what I find interesting.
Sorry, Jen. You've given me an example of free speech being under threat. You can't tell me what the person said.
Well,
I've asked you for one single thing that you can't say in the UK without fear of being arrested, and you can't think of anything. It's because Britain still is a country, compared to the United States, by the way, where free speech absolutely exists and always will.
Well, we both see it differently then.
But you can't give me any single point of evidence whatsoever to back up your idea.
Why don't you give me an example of how free speech still exists and censorship is not there?
Because you don't get arrested by the police for saying anything that isn't incitement or hate speech in this country. People are free to express their opinions. People are free to give their views. We do not have a police state in this country, unlike, I might say, the way that the United States is going under Donald Trump.
Well, you know, that's interesting because it's not going that way with Donald Trump. It was going that way, and it's now reversing itself.
Right. So banning journalists from the White House because you don't like what they've written, demanding the impeachment of judges because you don't like what they've ruled, sacking government officials because they've dared to criticise you at any point in recent years, defunding universities because they're not doing what you do, threatening law firms if they don't toe the party line, defunding media organisations that you think are against you, arresting students because of what they've written on social media, and ramping up checks of people entering the UK to check they haven't posted anything on Facebook that you don't like, doesn't amount to any sort of attack on free speech.
That's really twisting things without the specific examples. You're giving... You're giving examples the same way I gave the example of the 82-year-old man.
But you didn't give any examples, and I've just given you 10.
No, you've just given me a very biased perspective.
Bias is facts. All of those things have happened. Which of those haven't happened? Have journalists been banned from the White House under the Trump administration?
have journalists been banned, or have they brought in alternative media that presents a different
I'm not talking about
angle?
Have journalists from organisations like the Associated Press been banned by the White House? Yes or no?
Yes, they have.
Right. Have judges been threatened with
But
impeachment
wait a minute.
because the White House doesn't like their rulings?
Wait
Yes
a
or
minute.
no?
Let's not do it that way. Let's go back to
Because the
that.
answer's
And
yes.
why were they? Why were they banned?
But so
They
we
were-
accept, right, are we accepting that all the things I just
You know
suggested
what?
have happened?
If you don't let me finish, then we can't really have a conversation here, because you've got a very biased perspective
I'm not
here,
biased at
a
all.
very angle.
I'm giving you facts, and I'm just asking whether you recognise that those things are true.
No. You know what? It's so interesting. Did we not have a bunch of fake news here? And in the U.S., we did. And why? Why did we have fake news? Because it was biased and it was wrong. And so that is one of the reasons. You know, you're listing 10 things and cutting me off.
All right.
But then why was the Associated Press no longer welcome? Because they gave fake news that has been proven.
Jen, you coming on the national radio station here on LBC and saying an 82-year-old man being arrested is an attack on free speech without having a clue what he's actually said is not fake news at all.
It's not that I haven't had a clue. I can't remember the specifics.
Right.
But the fact that
But how can you know it's an attack on free speech if you can't remember what he'd actually said?
Well, you know, it's very interesting because you started this off by saying J.D. Vance had a dig. And so we don't get to have an intelligent discussion about whether there really is censorship going on, if people are afraid to speak out.
But he has had a dig, and that's his own language. He said previously when he talked about the
No,
UK...
you called it a dig.
Well,
Now that you've seen the full exchange, it's easier to understand why this interview has generated so much attention. What stood out to me wasn't that two people disagreed. Political debates are full of disagreements. It was what happened the moment the conversation moved from broad claims to one very specific question. That's where everything changed. This is actually the second time I've watched Dr. Jan Halper-Hayes struggle when she's asked to defend a major political argument under sustained questioning. Given her background as a former Trump advisor and her academic credentials, you'd expect her to arrive with clear examples ready to support her position. Instead, when the interviewer asked for a single concrete example to back up the claim that free speech is under threat in Britain, there simply wasn't one forthcoming. And that's the key takeaway. In any serious debate, whether you're on the left, the right, or somewhere in between, strong claims need strong evidence. Viewers can decide for themselves whether they agree with someone's politics. But it's much harder to defend making a sweeping statement if you can't point to a clear example when challenged. Did you notice how the tone of the interview changed? At the beginning, the discussion was broad and confident, but as soon as the questions became more specific, the conversation shifted from explaining the argument to defending the argument itself. That's a pattern you often see in political interviews when an interviewer keeps bringing the discussion back to the original claim instead of allowing it to drift onto a different topic. The debate also raises a wider question about free speech. It's a subject that politicians and commentators across the political spectrum talk about regularly, but it's also one where definitions matter. If someone argues that free speech is being restricted, most people will naturally expect them to provide examples that support that conclusion. That's exactly what the interviewer was asking for throughout this exchange. Later in the discussion, the interviewer listed several actions taken by the Trump administration that critics argue placed pressure on journalists, universities, public institutions, and other organizations. Whether viewers agree with every example or not, the contrast was difficult to ignore. One side was presenting specific cases to support its position, while the other struggled to identify even one example to support the original claim about Britain. That's why this exchange resonated with so many people online. It wasn't simply because of the politics. It was because viewers watched a confident argument run into the same question again and again and never really overcome it. But that's my view. I'm much more interested in hearing yours. Do you think the interviewer asked fair questions? Was the guest given enough opportunity to explain her position? And more importantly, did the argument convince you by the end of the interview? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to see more political debates analyzed in this way, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. It really helps the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.